Hello, my name is Liza Holland, and I will be your moderator today. I'm with the Nonpartisan League of Women Voters of Lexington, and we are here with candidates for Circuit Judge Family Court 22, Division 4. Thank you very much for both of you for being here today. Candidates will have 60 seconds to introduce themselves, 60 seconds to reply to questions, and 60 seconds for closing remarks. There is no time for rebuttal during these rounds, and they can use their time in closing to address anything that they would like to do. And we will begin with opening remarks, which have been selected online with random.org. And Mr. Devine, you will go ahead and go first. So you have 60 seconds to introduce yourself.
All right, thank you. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for having us today. It is very much appreciated. My name is Devine. I am the Fayette Family Court Judge for the 6th Division. I know Ms. Holland said the 4th Division. It's actually the 6th Division. And I am from Springfield, Kentucky. I've practiced law for 25 years in every area of family law until I got appointed by Governor Beshear in March of this year. During my private practice, I practiced over or approximately 1,700 cases, having hundreds of trials and contested hearings in every area of family law. So from custody to time sharing, domestic violence to high asset, complex divorce cases, to paternity to adoption cases, and grandparent rights. I've been on several boards. I'm the past chair of the Fayette County Bar Association Domestic Relations Section. I'm on the Grandparents as Parents Committee, and I've been on that committee for 16 years and been a frequent speaker at the Grandparents as Parents Conference, which is held every year in Lexington. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for your correction, which actually Ms. Yahr corrected us earlier, and somehow it still managed to, the typo still managed to get on there. So thank you so very much, and Ms. Yahr, you have your opportunity to introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, League, for having us. My name is Tiffany Yahr, and I am currently an attorney for the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. So I represent social workers and children in the foster care system. I've been an attorney for 15 years this month. I started my career in private practice, and in 2015, I decided to leave that career for a career in public service. I am a little bit of a unique candidate because I come from a child welfare background. And in Fayette County, we have never had a judge that has come from that kind of background. And that gives me a unique perspective and a different lens in which to see these cases. I am a mom of 4. I have 3 biological children and 1 child that we have adopted through the foster care system. So I've seen that too. I've also been lucky enough to be involved in multiple organizations, including CASA and the Lexington Human Trafficking Coalition. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you'll take this first question first. As a prospective judge, what do you consider to be your greatest strengths and your weaknesses?
So as a prospective judge, I would say that my greatest strength is my background in child welfare. And child welfare encompasses all different types of decision-making skills. There's a need to collaborate with community partners. There's a need to know your community and the different people that would come around you. So I think that as a judge that has to make decisions across the board in multiple different cases, that kind of background would be my biggest asset. My biggest weakness is I always need to make sure that I'm looking at the big picture, and that sometimes I can lose the forest through the trees, and because I'm a very detailed oriented person. So I have to make sure that I am always stepping back to make sure that I'm getting the full context and the full picture of what's in front of me.
Thank you so much. Mr. Devine.
Yes, ma'am. I think the greatest strength that I have that I bring to the table is my extensive experience in every area of family law, from, again, doing hundreds of divorce cases and custody cases, time sharing issues, as well as dependency, abuse, and neglect cases, and domestic violence cases and grandparent right cases. I think having that background is really important for the families of Fayette County, because whether Miss Holland, you are, Miss Hughes, whether you guys are ever in family court, which hopefully you're not unless it's an adoption, which is a great thing, somebody, your family, friends, relatives, somebody will be impacted by a family court decision, and those impacts are generational on occasion. And so you want and need somebody that has the full experience and is up to date with regard to every statutory law and case law that exists in all of those areas. My weakness is I work myself to death, basically. That's my biggest weakness.
Workaholic. I'm afraid lots of us are guilty of that. Mr. Devine, you'll take this next question first. What injustices have you witnessed, either inside or outside of the courtroom, and what was your response to those events?
Okay, well, the injustices that I see and that I've tried to take action towards correcting is primarily this. People's ability, particularly those that cannot afford an attorney, their access to justice. And so when I was a private attorney, I would always see at Motion Hour, back when we attended Motion Hour in person, all of these people that didn't have attorneys sitting in the back waiting for 2.5 hours, sometimes 3 hours waiting for the case to be called. And so that's not access to justice. So what I did, as soon as I got appointed, one of the first things I did is to make sure we started a pro se docket where we only had individual that could not afford an attorney on that docket, so that they could come in, not worry about having to wait for attorneys, and they know that they're going to be heard and respected when they're before me. I've also been instrumental in helping with the Legal Self-Help Center, which is a pilot program in Fayette County, to make sure that those that cannot afford an attorney have equal access to justice.
Thank you so much. Ms. Yahr.
Yes, in my career working with families and children involved in the child welfare system, the injustices that I see involve parents who have a lack of financial means, and also some cultural issues that we run past. And so I think the biggest thing that I've tried to do is make sure that we're meeting the needs of the families as they are, making sure that we're providing those supports so that the court can make equitable decisions. Again, we're not looking to adjust any kind of legal standards, but we're trying to support families so that they can remove the barriers and the challenges that they have to meet those standards. So in the system, it's incredibly important that everybody has that equal footing, especially when we're talking about families with children.
Thank you so much. And you'll take this next question first. What do you believe to be the root causes for the high numbers of juvenile offenders? And what changes can the court system make to help to reduce these numbers?
So I think the root cause for juvenile offenders is mental health issues and ongoing generational trauma. I think that kids that commit offenses, whether they're status offenses that we see in family court or public offenses in district court, that almost all of the time these children have been subjected to either domestic violence in the home or substance abuse in the home or some other traumatic event that has caused them to repeat those negative behaviors. And I think what family court can do is make sure that every time we're touching a family or children, that we are making sure that we're paying attention very carefully to what services are being offered to that family, and making sure that we are doing everything that we can in order to help those children have successful outcomes.
Thank you so much. Mr. Devine.
Thank you. The juvenile offenders I see primarily as a result of domestic violence that has occurred in this community. And this community has a significant domestic violence problem. I was on call 4 weeks ago. I fielded 120 domestic violence petitions. And so when you have children that are in domestic violence situations, you have to be mindful of what services can we connect them to. And the family court has the ability, and since I've been on the bench, I see that we have a captive audience, and as a family court, we need to do more. And so I'm dedicated and have been committed to making sure we do more. When the court sees these children that are typically between the ages of 13 to 18, we connect them to services such as One Lexington or Operation Make a Change to reduce the gun violence. And we make sure that we try to get both parents involved in their lives, because that's another issue that causes problems, is we have dads that are not involved in the children's lives.
Thank you so much. That kind of leads into this next question. Family court is very unique, and it has lots of different complicating factors. What criteria would you use for deciding whether to impose or affirm sentences outside of standard ranges? And Mr. Devine, you'll take that first.
I think with family court, we need to be mindful that it's not a court of punishment. At least that's not the goal. So we're not sentencing juveniles to detention periods typically. So we need to be more mindful of how, again, we connect them to services and how we handle those that are before us in connecting them to services, because we know that our community is in need. We know that the domestic violence, again, is an issue. We have a significant amount. The 6th division in family court in Fayette County is the only division that has a truancy docket. So because we've had the COVID issue, and those children are typically behind and do not want to return to school, we have to do a better job of making sure they're connected to services, and that the parents know that the services exist and how we connect them to those. But no, I mean, the last resort is going to be to incarcerate or do anything as far as those children go.
Thank you so much. Ms. Yahr.
I think when the court is trying to make decisions about something as important as a punishment or a sentence, especially because family court, as he mentioned, is not a punitive court, it's incredibly important to look at those unique factors and to even dig a little bit deeper. Children's behaviors are often symptoms of other things going on in the home. So when the court is trying to make a determination about whether or not something has occurred that's intentional or whether it's unintentional or there are other factors, it's essential that the court dig into the real issue and try to find the root cause before resigning to the fact that there has to be some kind of punishment imposed.
Thank you so much. And you'll take this next question first. Pivoting back, we've had a lot of questions about public safety and violent crime. Violent crime, particularly youth violence, is perceived to be at a crisis level by many experts today. What, if any, do you believe is the appropriate, what role, if any, do you believe is the appropriate role for the judiciary in addressing this perceived crisis?
So I think particularly with family court, in order to address this violence, it's imperative that family court recognizes that we see children often at a very young age. And it's important that family court is touching those children early and providing services to those families so that we can play a preventative role in a lot of these circumstances. We want to make sure that we are helping families stop that cycle of violence, that we are making sure that there are services available to deal with trauma so that we are not inflicting that trauma on future generations. So for family court, I would say that the most imperative thing that can be done is to play the role of helping to prevent those children from getting involved into making those negative decisions.
Thank you so much. Mr. Devine.
The reality is that the gun violence issue in particular, and the domestic violence for that matter, but primarily the gun violence, is perpetrated by kids that are between the age, and I call them kids, 13 to 29. And that's what One Lexington here is designed to do, and to help those children and those people within that age group, because the perpetrators are primarily male, and the Fayette Family Court has a captive audience. So when we talk about domestic violence dockets, we talk about dependency, abuse, and neglect dockets, we talk about the truancy docket, we also talk about the child support docket. We have so much ability to have contact with people within this age group. And so we absolutely, as soon as the court sees that, as soon as I have seen that on my docket, if there's any potential violence at all, the court is connecting those children, I call them kids, to services such as One Lexington. And as far as dads being involved in their lives, the Fatherhood Initiative.
Mr. Devine, what have been the most effective methods for improving court procedures and efficiency? I know you touched on that earlier. And what other methods would you suggest?
Well, I think that the method that I'm putting into practice now is to make sure that I am absolutely prepared when I go into court. I have reviewed every pleading, every report that a cabinet worker has provided, a CASA worker that has provided, so that when we're in court, that we are as efficient as possible. And I think if you ask anybody in family court that has appeared before me, any practitioner, they're going to advise that I have been absolutely prepared in our dockets. Some, particularly the dependency, abuse, and neglect docket that typically took 3 to 4 hours, is taking about 2 hours. And that's so helpful to these cabinet workers that are typically sitting in court for hours while they should be out doing their job. So I'm very mindful of doing that and making sure that we reduce the amount of work that the cabinet workers have to do as far as issuing their reports.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Yahr,
Can you repeat the question?
what have been the most effective methods for improving court procedures and efficiency, and what other methods might you suggest?
My suggestion to improve efficiency is to make sure that the court is incredibly protective of its calendar. Every time the court sways one way or the other with adding an hour or so to accommodate one party, that means that the next case gets less time. So what I would like to do is be making sure that motion hour times are pretty strict. I would want to hold, in the interest of making sure that everybody is prepared, I would want cases where there's attorneys to make sure that they're drafting specific pretrial memorandums, so that if there's points that the parties agree on, we don't have to spend time litigating that. And I also think it's incredibly important to hold attorneys accountable to deadlines, so that the cases are continuing to progress and the court's calendar can accommodate getting all parties in all cases a hearing date or a time relatively quickly.
Thank you so much. And you will take this next question first. What do you believe are the causes of the high rates of minority incarceration?
I think the high rates of minority incarceration can, in some aspects, be traced back to a lack of services. I think that when folks are not only when they're struggling with poverty, when they're struggling with mental health, when they're struggling with violence in their community, and there's no services out there to help them, no way to help guide them through those struggles, then we tend to have negative outcomes. And with negative outcomes and negative behavior, that can more quickly lead to minorities being incarcerated, especially when we've got people that may not have access to private legal counsel, even though in criminal cases and other important cases, they are appointed counsel. So I think that poverty and the lack of services is probably a huge factor in minority incarceration.
Thank you. Mr. Devine.
Yes, I would agree with Ms. Yahr with regard to the high rate of minority incarceration, dealing with the lack of contact or connection with services. But I think another thing that we have to address, and we have to just hit it head on, is there is no doubt that there is either an actual bias or has been in the judiciary, or an implicit bias. And thankfully, the administrative office of the courts is doing what they can to ensure that every attorney and every person in the judiciary is trained extensively on diversity and inclusion so that we avoid the actual bias or direct bias, as well as being mindful of the potential implicit bias. So until we get that and we make sure that we are all on the same page and being mindful of every case in front of us so that we approach it no matter what person's color, gender, race, or sex, we're going to continue to have higher rates probably of minority incarceration.
Thank you. And you will take this next question first. And this is a tough one. Please describe your most difficult case and why.
The most difficult case that I've had to date since being on the bench since March is in my dependency, abuse, and neglect docket. And that is the cases of human trafficking. And yes, those things are terrible. And we talk about it, and I don't think this community fully appreciates the extent of human trafficking, particularly of children in this community. But what is frightening to me was the fact that their own parents would do that to their own children. And so that has been the most taxing case that the court has had to deal with. Is the court, I've had a couple of those cases where you're directing and talking to the parents and they act like that there is not a problem. And so there is a legitimate disconnect with those people. And yes, it might be a mental health issue about this being a problem.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yahr.
Yes, so one of the features of my office is we file and prosecute termination of parental rights cases to free children for adoption. And the most difficult case that I've had were actually just about 3 companion cases, because it was a grandmother, it was a mother, and it was a daughter. So I had to terminate parental rights on 3 generations of women in one family. And it was incredibly difficult because the trauma that the grandmother experienced was handed down to the daughter and thus handed down to the granddaughter. And so in those kind of circumstances, it's blatantly obvious how important it is that we are helping these families deal with past trauma so that they can model good parenting and healthy relationships so that we don't have to repeat that kind of generational problem.
Thank you so much. And this will be the last question before we turn to closing remarks. What do you perceive as the greatest obstacle to justice, if any?
I think the biggest obstacle to justice facing family court is the lack of finances for services. So I think when family court, and when we talk about what justice is in family court, we're talking about those equitable decisions. And in order to make sure that everybody is receiving an equitable decision, we've got to be able to effectively remove those barriers and challenges that affect families. And to do that, we need services. And we need to be able to provide families with those kind of services so that we can allow them to get themselves to the point where they can have the types of outcomes and to be able to fully take advantage of those good rulings. And so it's super important that in our community that we have those resources, and that appears to be something that's lacking.
Thank you. Mr. Devine.
Thank you. I guess I interpreted that question a little bit different. Maybe I'm wrong in it, but when you talk about the greatest obstacle to justice, I think we're talking about how can they make decisions that are equitable and in line across the board instead of there being such a deviation from case to case in the way one case is presided over and ruled upon compared to the other. And again, I will go back to the pro se docket that I've started. I think the greatest obstacle to justice is making sure that every litigant, every person that comes before this court has the ability to have equal access to justice. They each and every one of them needs to know that when they come before the court, that they are going to be heard, they are going to be treated with respect, and they're going to be treated with dignity. And the biggest thing that I've found since I've been in this position is if you hear them, even if the ruling is not in their favor, they accept the decision typically because they know that they've been heard. And I think that's the greatest obstacle to justice, is people not feeling that they've been heard.
Thank you so much, and thank you to both candidates. It's been a really informative forum, which totally goes with our league mission of sending informed voters to the voting booth. We now turn to closing remarks, and based upon random.org, Mr. Devine, you go first.
All right, thank you. Thank you guys again for allowing this forum and for us to address you. I think, again, it is important for the people to understand that this position has generational impacts. And so whether you're in family court or whether it's, most likely it's a family friend, a family member, a relative, or somebody that you know or love, is going to be impacted by the family court decisions. So it is vital that you have somebody that has extensive experience in all areas. And I am that candidate. So I appreciate the opportunity. And I just appreciate the ability to address your forum today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Yahr.
I echo that appreciation for the opportunity to be here and speak to the audience. I would again reiterate that in choosing these smaller local races, it's incredibly important for voters to do their research, to look at forums like this, to read up, because these local races are definitely what's going to impact Lexington citizens' lives, even more so than maybe some national races. So I think it's important and it's time for Fayette County to have a family court judge that comes from a child welfare background. And I have also had the opportunity to do the private practice cases. I have that experience, but I've chosen to go a different way. And I would love to continue my public service on a larger forum. So thank you, everybody, for having me.
Thank you so very much. And thanks to the both of you for participating in this type of a forum. We're so glad to have you here today. If you are interested in league membership or would like to see the rest of these candidate forums, please do check out our website at lwvlexington.com. You can also find additional information about the candidates at vote411.org. Here in Kentucky, some new legislation allows us for 3 days of early voting. They will be available Thursday, Friday, and Saturday before Election Day. And here in Lexington, it'll be at the Lexington Senior Center at 195 Life Lane from 8:30 to 4:30. And then, of course, you have your regular election day on November the 8th. Please make a plan to make sure that you are able to get out and vote. And thank you so much for joining us today.